I started to go on local TV, and then Random House asked me to write a book on magnesium because 80% of known metabolic functions require magnesium. 100% of metabolic functions require minerals. But his research found that women who simply take calcium supplements are at a much higher risk for heart disease. People who promote high-dose iodine, like 50 milligrams a day, it's terrifying. Magnesium L-threonate is the worst. Their labels will say on the front, 2,000 milligrams. They'll say magnesium L-threonate above it, and at the bottom, 2,000 milligrams. You think, yay, I'm getting 2,000 milligrams of magnesium. You turn the label over, the FDA, it gets half its income from drug companies. So all of a sudden, potassium became the bad guy instead of the form that was used. And now I'm 75 and I feel better than I did in my 30s. But the major microorganism I found was yeast overgrowth with its.
Hello and welcome to the channel. I'm Sara and today's guest is Dr. Carolyn Dean. Dr. Dean received her medical qualification in Nova Scotia, Canada, and also her naturopathic medical qualification in the College of Naturopaths in Ontario. Dr. Dean has been in clinical practice for over 50 years, and she's been beating the health drum since the 1980s. Carolyn is the author of over 50 books, with her bestseller being The Magnesium Miracle. In this interview, we go right back to the basics and talk about the role of magnesium in the body and why magnesium deficiency is still so common, and also the pitfalls of taking incorrect magnesium supplementation and other factors which affect magnesium metabolism in the body. Because nothing works in isolation, we also discuss other minerals. We also discuss mitochondria, the worst foods for health, and problems with the mainstream medical system and why so many people end up on so many medications. The link to Carolyn's book is in the description, along with courses that I offer and many, many free bits of information on health and quantum biology, including a link to my Substack. Welcome to the channel, Dr. Dean. Do you want to introduce yourself and tell us all about your background and how you became the expert in magnesium?
Sara, please call me Carolyn. I know I'm a doctor. You don't have to tell me. No. What happened with my world is in my teens, and that's going back to the 60s, to the 1960s, I began reading about nutrition and lifestyle, and my then boyfriend, now husband of whatever, 57 years, we traveled around North America, landed in California in the hippie days, but I got involved with the nutritional health movement. And from there, I just thought, wow, people can be so healthy, lifestyle, diet, etc. And when we came back to Halifax, Nova Scotia, I went into a biology science program, and my honors was in genetics. So my joke is that I wanted to isolate the stupidity gene and snip that out. But what happened, I happened to be in all pre-med courses, and finally I got the bright idea to go into medicine. And I sincerely thought at that time that within 10 years, all the medical doctors would be involved in nutrition and nutrients. Back then, in now the 70s, the products, the supplements that were available were all food-based. And we developed an understanding that, if you don't get enough in your diet, you can eat these food-based supplements. But over the years, most of the supplements became synthetic. And the vitamins now, the minerals, they've always been these mineral compounds. So what happened in my world, I did medicine, then I got my naturopathic degree. I practiced mostly as a naturopath with a medical license. My practice was swamped and overwhelmed within a few months in Toronto, Canada. So I knew people were just that interested. And at the same time, there was the chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia started to raise its head. So I kind of got involved with looking at what I now call total body meltdown in people, mostly women, with their multitasking, family, profession, poor diet, drinking coffee, maybe smoking cigarettes, drinking alcohol, and just running themselves into the ground. All the organs the adrenal glands were overstressed, the thyroid is weakened with pregnancies, the sex hormones, they depend on the adrenals and the thyroid, so then they start waning. And we started calling women perimenopausal because they had all these symptoms before menopause. But I say that's just a made-up term. It's more total body meltdown. So in among all this, I personally was suffering the kind of headaches, brain fog, twitching eyes. I was developing heart palpitations, some IBS that I certainly developed in med school from all the stress, leg cramps. So eventually I got to New York doing a clinical research trial on AIDS and chronic fatigue patients. And one thing I realized is everybody has subliminal or even overt infections. Every person we tested in our study had a list of viruses and bacteria and parasites, and in some cases, Lyme disease that was depleting their immune system. But the major microorganism I found was yeast overgrowth with its 78 different toxins, with overwhelming people's immune systems. The yeast itself, in the budding stage, lives in our large intestine, and it has a function. But when you're taking antibiotics to kill off good and bad bacteria, the yeast will change from a budding stage into a thread-like stage and crawl up into the small intestine, damage the intestinal lining, causing leaky gut. And then through those broken membranes, you get the absorption of the 78 yeast toxins and undigested food. If they've ignored yeast overgrowth, it's too hard to treat. I certainly have formulas for it, but in the allopathic community, they don't know what to do with head to toe symptoms. They've called leaky gut, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. They'll even treat it with antibiotics, which will just create more yeast. So in my world, the total body meltdown is mineral deficiencies and yeast overgrowth. And in New York, where I was doing this research, I wrote a small health encyclopedia. I started to go on local TV, and then Random House asked me to write a book on magnesium. And I thought, 300-page book, how can I possibly find enough material? The moment I started researching it, thankfully, the internet was up, so I was able to do online research. And I realized that all my symptoms were magnesium deficiency. So that was the early 90s. Yeah, the early 90s. No, the late 90s, because then my Magnesium Miracle book, which I wrote for Random House, it was supposed to come out on the date of 9/11 in 2001. But because everything shut down in New York, the publishing industry just stopped. It didn't come out until 2003. So from the time I wrote this book, realized that I was magnesium deficient, it became personal. And it became even more personal because when I started to take magnesium to treat my symptoms, I immediately got the laxative effect. So my mission became trying to interest all the mineral companies into researching and and producing a non-laxative magnesium. They didn't want to put the funding in, whatever reason, it didn't happen until I came across a chemist that I was able to work with that made a stabilized ion of magnesium in a picometer size that you could take at larger amounts than you could ever take with a mineral compound. And personally, I was able to take 1,200 milligrams of elemental magnesium in a stabilized ionic state compared to 50 milligrams that had me running to the bathroom. So huge breakthrough in my mind that it changed everything, because 80% of known metabolic functions require magnesium. 100% of metabolic functions require minerals. Linus Pauling said something like you can trace all illnesses and diseases to mineral deficiency. And he was the vitamin C Nobel Prize winner, but he knew it was about the minerals acting as cofactors in every metabolic process in the body. So what we've done with minerals is we've depleted the soils, we've killed the good bacteria in the soils so that the bacteria can't break down the soil and create ionic size minerals, which is the size that's needed to be absorbed through plant rootlets. And then that's the size, picometer size, that the cells in our body have to open and close as mineral ion channels. So on and on and on I could go, but I'll stop here and see if you have any questions.
Oh, yes, I do. Because I suppose with ions and matter and atoms, I'm always interested in trying to find out what do things pivot on. And that's why I contacted you, because everything to do with, you described a whole host of illnesses and situations that a lot of people could relate to, because a lot seems to pin back on cortisol and magnesium. And magnesium is notoriously hard to test, because in your book you've highlighted even problems with the RBC magnesium test and the ionized magnesium test the best. Then, as we know, there's so many supplements on the market of all these different forms. They are quite sneaky about actually how much elemental magnesium there really is. Then with ions being sort of, as we'd say, a partial atom, they're obviously something that's different to a full atom. I know you've been researching this for such a long time. So I think it's one of these things that people are aware of magnesium. They think, oh, this is this thing I should be taking. And then I asked them, why are you taking it? And they've got absolutely no idea. And when I read your book, as I was saying before, it's laid out really well. And it's very easy for either a scientist or a doctor or a layperson to read. I actually discovered you by myself. Here's the remag. It was via the inventor of the Cosmic Tower. And I thought, oh, well, if he likes it, then it's good enough for me. And then I read your book and I thought, oh, actually, I've just stumbled on somebody who knows a lot about magnesium. So maybe for people who know they should be taking magnesium, because you highlighted some important things it does, maybe if you go through the key points. And I think also its relationship with calcium is something I find that's of utmost importance for sort of especially cardiovascular situations.
Calcium and magnesium are antagonists, we can say. I think what happened in our ancestral development, going back centuries, humans grew up around oceans because they had food. They had algae, they had fish. Seawater has 3 times the magnesium as it does calcium. So they were getting plenty of magnesium, I would think. The body had to adapt to all that magnesium that was antagonizing calcium by giving us mechanisms to pull calcium out of our diet. I mean, if they were eating fish and fish bones, they were getting calcium. But vitamin D came into play. Sunlight on the skin makes vitamin D. Vitamin D pulls calcium into pulls calcium by helping it absorb through the intestinal tract. But magnesium is necessary to activate calcium. So I think things were going along quite nicely for a while. And then we hear that 100 years ago in our diet, we were getting 500 milligrams of magnesium. And now we might be lucky to get 200 milligrams. At the same time, many of our foods are fortified with calcium. Women over 40 are told to take calcium supplements. So high amounts of calcium now and low amounts of magnesium. Calcium tightens up muscles. It creates action potentials that help our movement, etc. If it's all about calcium, though, it's tighten, spasm, cell dies. And the thing about the magnesium-calcium relationship is magnesium is has the function of opening the mineral ion channels to allow a certain amount of calcium into the cell to create that action potential, and then it opens up again and pulls out the calcium. If you don't have magnesium to do that function, you will get overstimulation by calcium, and that's it. Every muscle in the body is affected by this relationship. So if you have an eye twitch or a leg cramp or a pain or a muscle spasm, it's most likely too much calcium and not enough magnesium. And I mean, to me, that's so important to emphasize. 600 muscles in the body can be affected by too little magnesium, too much calcium. What Dr. Mark Boland in New Zealand discovered, he did about half a dozen trials on calcium. I don't know if it was clinical trials or just research, but his research found that women who simply take calcium supplements are at a much higher risk for heart disease. And they also get gallstones, kidney stones, Hillsborough, and breast tissue calcifications that are often misdiagnosed as pre-cancerous and throw everybody into a frenzy. So over-calcification is where we're at now. Anti-aging researchers talk about aging is related to over-calcification. It's also about the telomeres. And what we know about telomere research, telomeres are the end kind of shoelace, the end of a shoelace on chromosomes. And with age, they kind of fray and break down and fall away. Magnesium stabilizes telomeres, which is pretty awesome. So calcium, magnesium, very important to look at. And I will defer to you for the next question and all the parts I missed in between.
Oh no, it's fine, because I think your book's so easy to read that people will glean a huge amount of information. So I was just gonna, yes, the new edition.
Right.
Yes.
Yes, what happened, Sara, was the second or third edition of the Magnesium Miracle suddenly became 600 pages, and people just couldn't read it. 600 references, people can go to it. But this is laid out, as you say, very nicely, and it's almost encyclopedic when you look at the magnesium deficiency condition. Can I read out a few of them?
Oh yeah, of course, because I was going to say a lot of people who watch this channel are into quantum biology, so anything about mitochondria, people will love that. And I think just the idea that calcium overload in the mitochondria is a disaster. Also, non-native EMFs create calcium dysregulation. So I was thinking you've talked a lot about less magnesium in the diet, but then now we've got an even bigger demand for magnesium, because I think I can't remember how many reactions exactly in the mitochondria need magnesium. It's something, it's like an astronomical amount. So yes, anything that you think is important for people, especially stuff they've never even connected to magnesium, would be great.
I love mitochondria. The glycolysis cycle, which produces pyruvate for the Krebs cycle, it needs about in 6 of its 8 or 10 steps, it requires magnesium. In the Krebs cycle, there are 2 or 3 that require magnesium. But the end stage of creating adenosine triphosphate, ATP, the energy molecule, it has to be bound to magnesium in order to activate it. And what happens when a person goes to a doctor and says, well, I don't have any energy, I'm not sleeping at night, I feel frazzled, I don't know if I can take it anymore, they're going to be given a drug, not magnesium. And it's frustrating. The mitochondria, one of the functions that I read about was it will pull in calcium and try to hide it if the bloodstream is over calcified. So it will sequester calcium. And then what does that calcium do if it keeps building up? If you don't stop the calcium intake, it kills the mitochondria. And I thought, my gosh, that's incredible. So magnesium, they talk about it acting as a calcium channel blocker. What do we use in heart disease? Calcium channel blockers, because it's the calcium that keeps the hyperexcitability of the cells going. And zinc is also a calcium channel blocker. So it is very important. I know I emphasize magnesium all the time, but for me, it's the ground. It's where you start. Being a clinician all these many years, I feel for it was my patients, and then it was telephone consulting clients, and now it's customers. I really feel bad for people who, they're told by their naturopath or some blogger or biohacker, well, you have to go on a big detox before you can get healthy. You have to stop all these things before you can get healthy. And then you have to eat all these things. But if you don't have the energy to even make the first move, forget about it. What I say is if 80% of known metabolic functions require magnesium, get your magnesium in order. And then when personally I couldn't get my magnesium in order, I was lying in Epsom salt baths trying to absorb it. I would give myself skin rashes trying to put as much magnesium oil on my body as I could. But it wasn't until I had the stabilized ion of magnesium that could jump into the cells that I started changing from a, very depleted 40 and 50-year-old to now I'm 75 and I feel better than I did in my 30s because I don't have magnesium deficiency. So if you get your grounding in magnesium, then a lot of things fall away. If you think your headaches are, what would it be? Electromagnetic influence. How are you going to change that? Because you can't change the EMFs, but you can change the EMFs with magnesium, because the EMFs open up the cell mineral ion channels and let calcium in and create the hyperexcitability. But if you have magnesium to shut down those channels, the EMFs affect you even less. We have so much toxicity and heavy metals, the yeast overgrowth toxins. We have so much going on that we can't possibly stop all those things, but we can support our body to be able to detoxify and clear. 2 things about toxins. Heavy metals will jump into mineral receptor sites, I'll call them. I don't know exactly what's going on at that cellular level, but wherever the minerals go and you're depleted of minerals, heavy metals will take take their place. I mean, we know that about strontium. Strontium will go into bones when you don't have enough calcium. And some people say, oh, well, we need strontium to make our bones stronger. They put strontium in supplements. Strontium is a brittle mineral, and it's pushing out calcium, because once strontium is there, it's not going to allow calcium in. You have to wait for that bone cell to die and replace it with a balance of magnesium and calcium from your diet. In terms of chemicals, I have the example of when my customers take a couple of months of the magnesium, and I can't mention the name of my products. The FDA will get after me if I'm implying that my products can help people, tongue in cheek. So with people after 2 or 3 months, mostly, yeah, you're so cute.
There you go.
Thank you. Yeah. With 2 or 3 months of magnesium to boost your immune system, we have customers calling saying, I don't know what's going on. I felt so good, and now I have a rash. My tongue is coated. My ears are itching. And women will say, I have vaginitis. And we say, whoop-de-doo. You are starting to kill your yeast overgrowth, and we will support you with the formulas that I use for that. So the immune system is supported by magnesium. And who would know that unless you follow this trajectory? So many people will be on about magnesium. Oh, it's so fantastic. But when they don't have the right magnesium, they never get the full effect of it, and they move on to other things. And they're missing the fact that magnesium is important for acid reflux because of the spasms that can be created in the stomach and the diaphragm, adrenal fatigue, anxiety and panic attacks, atherosclerosis, atrial fibrillation, bowel disease, calcification. We talked about chronic fatigue, cystitis, which are bladder infections, detoxification, diabetes, fatigue, headaches, hypertension. Because look at hypertension. What happens in that scenario? The blood vessels are lined with muscle, and they're smooth muscles, which it's not like skeletal muscle. If those muscles don't have enough magnesium, if they have too much calcium, they'll go into spasm. They'll tighten up, and the circumference of the artery will get smaller and smaller, and then you'll get high blood pressure. But if you use magnesium to relax the muscles, then the blood vessels open up. There's also nitric oxide that relaxes arterial arteries and the muscles in the arteries. Nitric oxide, it is stimulated by magnesium. So hypertension, you go to your doctor, you're under tremendous stress, you've been drinking coffee, you've created a diuretic effect with the coffee, you've lost your magnesium. The doctor or the nurse finds your blood pressure is slightly elevated or maybe elevated. They look at your chart. Oh, this has happened a few times. It's time you went on blood pressure medication. So they put the person on a diuretic, which means they're trying to decrease your blood volume to take the pressure off your arteries. But in decreasing your blood volume, they decrease the water that's necessary to go into your cells to create metabolic functions. Minerals are supposed to go into the cells, pull water in after them, and then they go to work. So the diuretic, it's criminal, really. And what it does is it depletes your magnesium and your potassium. And you go back to the doctor and your blood pressure is higher. And they say, oh, we caught your blood pressure just in time. Take this calcium channel blocker and this ACE inhibitor, and you'll be fine. 3 months later, you come back for blood tests to make sure the drugs aren't killing your liver. And then it's oh my goodness, look at this. You have high cholesterol. We caught that just in time. You have high blood sugar. We caught that just in time. Here's 3 more drugs. And that's how it goes. Because what happens when you keep taking the diuretic, you lose more magnesium. Magnesium is necessary to balance cholesterol production and keep it from being too high. And with the blood sugar, one of the signs of diabetes in the medical textbooks is magnesium deficiency. So we've created a system that just encourages people to get sicker and sicker and take more and more drugs, make more and more doctor's appointments. And who benefits? The drug companies and the doctors.
I love the way you've kind of just gone through very sort of conditions that plague a lot of people and just explained exactly the process of how somebody would end up on benzodiazepine, sleeping tablets, pain medication, which blood pressure medication, diabetes medication. And that's why I wanted to talk to you. And I don't think there's anything wrong with just keeping things simple, going back to basics and just talking about one thing like a mineral, like magnesium, because you're completely correct. There's a gazillion supplements I could buy, and I'm interested in them, but not as much as I was in the past being a biochemist. So sometimes I think, okay, let's just go right back to the beginning and find an expert in potassium, sodium, copper, and magnesium, and just simplify things again before it goes out of control. And I think you kind of summed it up beautifully in a way that people can really relate to. The other thing that, again, because people get sold so much on different supplements, and they always ask me, what's the difference between magnesium orotate, magnesium malate, magnesium glycinate? Which one should I take? Should I take 7 all at once? But I think what you're saying is fundamentally it has to be in its ionic form. So I think going back again, because people will have understood now the importance of magnesium in all these different processes. So now it's maybe explaining a bit more about, actually, I know you explained at the beginning, but you can go into sort of more detail.
Yes, I think it's all about the absorption of the nutrients. When we were able to get all our nutrients from our food, we were much healthier. I'm sure of it. When I moved to Maui in Hawaii, I immediately set up a relationship with a local young farmer. He does biodynamic organic farming. So I've heavily supported his farm because I know how important food is. But even he can't put in all the minerals that are required. It's very expensive to put rock dust through in your soil. And for the past 14 years, I've tried experiments on and off with just eating off the farm food, and my heart palpitations come back. I'm not getting enough minerals. And magnesium and potassium are very important. The B vitamins are important. So food is medicine is a myth now. That ship has sailed. We cannot depend on our food. So the more you hear that, doctors, even allopathic doctors now say, well, you should eat a good diet and this and that. And with food, Sara, I think it's more about what you have to avoid. You have to avoid sugar. Yeah. Sugar competes with vitamin C. So when you eat a lot of sugar, processed sugar, desserts, even fruit sugar, you are working with a chemical formula that looks very much like vitamin C. So there's this huge competition to get the sugar into the cells. And if you have more sugar than vitamin C, you don't get vitamin C into your cells to act as an antioxidant to antidote what sugar may be doing when it's not used for energy. Sugar is a poison. I think we have to get used to saying that. I don't like saying it because I love sugar. I grew up on a big bowl of ice cream and a can of sugared peaches or pears every night when I was studying. And it's a wonder I survived.
I want to thank my sponsor, Lightwater Scientific, who helped me deliver free, valuable information to you and also allow me to have great guests on this channel. Lightwater Scientific produce the purest and most deuterium-depleted water in the world. Depleting or lowering your deuterium has numerous health benefits, from better metabolic health, more energy, greater resilience, less brain fog, increased physical performance, enhanced healing, and healthier mitochondria. Deuterium is an isotope of hydrogen, also known as heavy water, because it's bigger and heavier than regular hydrogen. Even though deuterium makes up only 0.02% of hydrogen, it's found everywhere. Deuterium is a burden to your body because it interferes with the intricate chemical reactions that occur by slowing them down. Deuterium is kryptonite to your mitochondria, and we need healthy mitochondria to produce energy. There's over 60 years of scientific research on the negative effects of too much deuterium on health, and also the positive benefits of lowering deuterium in the body. Lightwater deuterium-depleted water is 100% safe and non-toxic. In fact, it's the closest in structure to the metabolic water that your mitochondria produce. Lightwater deuterium-depleted water comes in 5 or 10 parts per million glass or plastic bottles, so level up your health by leveling down your deuterium today. The purchase link is in the show notes, and use code Dr. Sara for a discount off your order.
And then what you have with seed oils, the vegetable oil, sunflower, safflower, soy oil, canola oil, that was the original GMO plant, and even corn oil. They are very high in omega-6 fatty acids. We need some omega-6s, and omega-3 is more important and it helps balance the omega-6. Too much omega-6, you have inflammation. I tell the story all the time about getting addicted to organic snack food, and then my joints started getting tight. This is how you tell if your joints are inflamed or you're retaining fluid. You pull the first 2 joints down, and if you can touch your palm without pain, then you're good. You're not retaining fluid and you're not inflamed. All of a sudden, I couldn't do that anymore. And I remember when I was in New York and feeling at my worst, I couldn't bend my fingers. So I was very inflamed. So when I stopped that, I finally looked at the label of the snack, and it was all sunflower oil. So I stopped it, and, my fingers went back to normal. So that's something that people can look at. So we're looking at sugar, we're looking at refined oils. Because of my yeast overgrowth work, I look at gluten foods. In North America, we've over-glutenized our wheat farming. When I've traveled in Europe and eaten pizza and wheat over there, it's not as glutenized, and I was able to tolerate it. So sugar, wheat, then there's dairy, and pasteurized dairy. The high lactose sugar in dairy can affect yeast overgrowth. So personally, I look at those things. I also look at coffee and alcohol. You look at the studies that we see periodically. You have to look and see who funded the studies. They're all industry studies that promote, coffee is good for you, and alcohol, in moderation is good for you. No, they're both poison, I'm afraid. I'll say this. I spent about 10 years of my life avoiding sugar, wheat, and dairy when I first realized I had so much yeast. And I had it from my ice cream diet when I was a kid, the antibiotics, the vaccines, mercury fillings, birth control pill. I had it bad. So I would just smell a food that I couldn't eat. It was terrible. And then, and finally when I had to create my own magnesium and then went into a handful of other very basic nutrients, I realized I had to create an anti-yeast product, or one that would balance yeast. We're always going to have a bit of yeast, but you have to keep it from broming out of the large intestine. And I'm working with picometer silver and an antifungal with Saccharomyces boulardii, which in clinical trials with children who have diarrhea is extremely safe. So I use that along with humic fulvic and a couple of other things. And what we're doing there is in a daily treatment with a mild antifungal, you keep it under control so that you don't have to lead a life of suffering. Back in the, I guess it was in the 80s when I was looking at chronic fatigue and allergies, what people would do for their health problems is avoid things. And they would move into the wilderness to avoid Wi-Fi. They would do all this, you know, they were so restrictive. Even now, when people say to our customers, oh, you have to avoid all these things, as I mentioned earlier, do not start with telling people what they can't do. You have to tell them what they can do, support them, as I said, with a good picometer magnesium, and then they will get enough energy and sleep and hope that they can change their diet.
No, that was great, because I tend to just let people speak. Just looping back, I wanted to ask you how old you were, but it's really rude. But luckily you said it yourself, and you're definitely the example of 70 is the new 40. But then you were mentioning coffee, because I don't drink alcohol and I do my best to avoid sugar, and I'm fine with that. But I like coffee. I don't drink that much, but I'm happy to take your advice. Would you? Because I was deliberately asking you. I said I had an all right RBC magnesium. If I got rid of coffee, would that solve the problem? But then you then unexpectedly told me something about your magnesium, that I might be able to have the magnesium and the coffee. But I'd be willing to give up the coffee if you thought, actually, I'm really interested in magnesium, I want more, and I'll do whatever to make mine better. If you said the coffee has to go, what are your thoughts?
I don't like to tell people, as I've said, to restrict. What you do is an experiment. You stop coffee for 3 weeks and see how you feel. And then you start it again. Let me just dive in about the RBC, Sara. I think that this is where we talk about potassium.
Okay.
Because a person might not be absorbing all the magnesium they could if they don't have enough potassium. And it seems to work both ways. When we have people who are just on their magnesium and they say, oh, I still have heart palpitations, whatever. And even though we've said, well, take some potassium broth and make sure your potassium foods are high. What we've gotten into actually in the diet world is with the keto diet, even paleo diet, is not enough carbs to give us enough potassium. The RDA potassium in the US is 4,700 milligrams. That's like a whole teaspoon of potassium, 5 grams in a teaspoon. And when you look at food lists for the amount of potassium, I mean, maybe, do bananas have about 200 or 300 milligrams, something like that? So if you add up the amount of food you have to take in to get your potassium, it's too much. What happened with potassium in the States is a number of years ago, a drug company put out a potassium that was enteric coated. And when it dissolved deep into the small intestine, it was acidic and it burned ulcers into the small intestine. So all of a sudden, potassium became the bad guy instead of the form that was used. And from that time on, the FDA said a dietary supplement can't have more than 99 milligrams per dose. You look at it, 99 milligrams, you need 4,700 milligrams. You're never going to get it. So some people started using different foods, which are high in potassium, but you don't know how much potassium is in food anymore. It could be nothing. So what I decided to do, most of my dosing is in teaspoons. My minerals are liquids. So I had my chemist concentrate the potassium so that one dose of 99 milligrams, which we could put on the label, was a quarter teaspoon. 4 quarters, 1 teaspoon would give you like 400 milligrams. And when it's picometer, it's like 2 and 3 times the amount is absorbed than you would get from a potassium compound. So I'm having people do 1 or 2 teaspoons of potassium to make up what they're not getting in their diet. So you look at your diet. Oh, I'm only getting 2,000 milligrams. Okay, I'll take some picometer potassium. So how does that sound?
That sounds great, because I didn't know about that. I've got Remite, that's your other mineral blend, and I've got Remag. I've had that for ages, but somebody else told me about the potassium. So do I just go and look for it on the internet, just under your brand? Because at the moment I'm just using a bag of potassium citrate. What you've just said, I love stories that expose lies. I've seen this loads of times. I tell people don't buy the capsules because they're just they're really expensive and you only get 99 milligrams. So that's kind of answered a question I've had for a long time. So that's great. I'll do the experiment. I think it was no coffee, and then to try your potassium, the pico potassium.
Yes, I'm trying to remember. Oh, yes, the red blood cell test that you mentioned, Sara. So important. They're looking for magnesium in red blood cells, but the red blood cells are the only cell in the body that doesn't have mitochondria.
Mm.
Mitochondria that pull in all the magnesium, do all the work. So I've never felt that the red blood cell test could be effective. It's better than serum magnesium. And if you get a baseline, okay, then you manipulate your diet, your coffee, your taking of picometer magnesium. And then if it becomes elevated, good, you're absorbing. But you have to go for a high amount of the red blood cell. 15 years ago, when I first started looking at red blood cell magnesium, the range was like 4.2 to 6.5. And now the bottom range starts at 3.2. So what they've done, and this is how blood tests work, is they use the range of the population that comes into the lab and gets their blood test. So it's the sick population. So in 10 years, they've gone from 4.2 at the bottom level to 3.2. So your doctor won't get a red flag on your blood test unless it's 3.1. And the nurse or the assistant will be able to say, oh, your magnesium's fine. And that is horrendous because you want to be up in the 6s. So what we've done, my company is experiments with university experiments, and they're all using ionized magnesium testing. Ionized magnesium measures the ions. Our picometer magnesium is ions. We did a clinical trial with humans, not with rats. And they took 1 dose of 1 teaspoon, 300 milligrams of elemental ionic magnesium. And within 2 hours, their ionic levels had jumped to show that they had absorbed that dose. And what the researcher said, Taylor Wallace, he's never seen such absorption before. The blood we took from our patient, our clinical trial patients, we froze some of it. Several years later, we tested the ionic magnesium, and it was the same as the original study. So we know that blood can be frozen, sent to a lab that has the right machine to do the testing, and we can start getting some valid testing for magnesium. So that's what I'm doing. I'm trying to raise the bar so that people get an accurate test. Right now, we cannot depend on serum magnesium only 1% of the magnesium in the whole body is in the blood. So we're just testing this tiny fraction. And because the body is so smart, it's going to keep that tiny fraction within a healthy range to keep the heart functioning. And we don't even get a blood test for magnesium on an electrolyte panel, not even the serum magnesium. So we're led to believe that the heart rhythm is caused by the calcium and the chloride and the sodium and the potassium, but not the magnesium. And that's just frightening.
Oh, I think they leave tests out of labs on purpose. And also, I completely agree with you about the ranges being wrong and the standard deviations of the sick people. But it's like trying to find these problems one mineral and marker at a time. Speaking of back to me doing my experiment on myself, in your book, you were talking about when you've done experiments on yourself about eating lots and lots of organic vegetables and things, because I know that there's obviously magnesium in chlorophyll, and then you found that it didn't work, and you've probably tried many times over and over to get magnesium from different foods without success, because sometimes you get to a point where you think, okay, well, the environment we live in is different than it used to be. I'm going to have to use some kind of supplement. So do you want to maybe talk a little bit about those experiments and why people who would say, oh, I refuse to take anything, might be missing a trick if they don't want to explore magnesium?
Well, look at the grocery stores and look at that broccoli. It doesn't have a label on it telling you what's in it. We have no idea of the vitamins or the minerals. When I look up a food on a U.S. Department of Agriculture website to find out what the nutrients are in it, I don't know if that's accurate. I don't know what year they made that test, and it made it available. But to say that we know what nutrients are in our food is impossible. And right now, or gardens, family gardens or backyard gardens are being suppressed, because they say, oh, they could be contaminated or whatever. They just want to stop people from having access to natural foods. It's big pharma, big grocery, big whatever, big processed food that want to feed us, and they keep us ill, and then we have to take medications. I mean, the best revenge about what we're doing is to stay healthy and stay away from doctors and stay out of hospitals. So I know I'm not really answering your question, but I just have never been able to do a vegetarian diet, even a macrobiotic diet. When I tried that years ago, which is vegetables and fish and not much else. Anyway, I did try a good macrobiotic diet. And after a few weeks, I started getting fluid building up in my lungs. I was kind of wheezing. I put my stethoscope on. It's like, I had fluid buildup. I felt okay. I was starting to get tired. But what I realized is I didn't have enough protein albumin globulin ratio was off, and I was retaining fluid that was building up in my lungs. So I ate some chicken, and it went away within a day. And Sara, I call myself one of the original biohackers.
Yeah.
I've been working on these things for a long time, and then coming to conclusions. And by having this close association with my patients and on, telephone clients and now my customers, I learned so much. And it's very frustrating when you get people who dance into this field, and think, oh, I'm going to know, I know this and I know that. And they're not dealing with first do no harm, for one thing. Because I think of, I don't remember the name of the person. I won't say it anyway, but people who promote high dose iodine, like 50 milligrams a day. It's terrifying because you can throw so much off. which brings me to why my multiple mineral is so important. The thyroid needs 9 minerals in order to produce thyroid hormones. It's not just iodine. So people who think, oh, we just push iodine, then the thyroid will be fine and this will be fine. No, what you do when you push one nutrient, except for magnesium, because let me say this sidebar, Sara, magnesium has the fail-safe that if you have too much, you'll get the laxative effect. You cannot overdose on magnesium. When they say, oh, it can cause all these problems if you have too much, that's the silly doctors giving IV magnesium in too high amounts too fast that are causing those problems. Or, when it's used in pregnancy eclampsia, which is the necessary treatment for eclampsia is magnesium, but they'll just give too much. So with what I'm talking about, it's just creating a balance is what we've got to do with these things. And anyway.
Oh, no, that's really interesting, because it's like everything that I've heard so many different sort of ways of doing things. And like you, I'll test stuff out. And I had concerns about the iodine for all different reasons, but purely just because it was so much, and it can have a huge detox effect. It can cause sort of Hashimoto's like symptoms. So yeah, I know what you mean about that. So just because I know I don't want to take up too much of your time, have you got any more stories about your biohacking, especially anything that went really badly wrong or was funny? Because I know in your book there's a story about somebody who contacted you and they wanted to eat 30 bananas a day or something for potassium. So you must have all sorts of stories and things, because I think anecdotes go down well as well.
I know one with chelation, how they use EDTA, intravenous chelation, to pull out heavy metals. I decided to try that, and I was quite proud of myself. Putting on my own turkey and putting the IV in, and I did about 2 or 3 treatments of this EDTA, which is a chelating agent that binds to heavy metals and other minerals in the body, including calcium, because calcification can cause atherosclerosis, so you want to get rid of that. After 2 or 3 treatments, my knees started to ache. And it said, oh my gosh, I'm pulling out all my minerals. This cannot be good. So I don't know that I ever referred people to chelation. I don't think in Toronto I had access to anyone who did that. But I realized that I've said earlier, when you're taking your magnesium and your other minerals, your mineral sites are filled up and they won't allow heavy metals to attach and become toxic. When you're taking enough magnesium, you won't allow your calcium to build up and cause all the calcification. I mean, this whole business about cholesterol plaques, there's a lot of calcium in those plaques, but the initial injury is not caused by all of a sudden there's too much cholesterol and it just slams against an artery wall. What I talk about more in my Magnesium Miracle book is at the bifurcation site of when an artery maybe turns into capillary and they get smaller and smaller and smaller. There can be, especially if there's vitamin C deficiency, there can be a breach in the collagen, which causes a weakening and maybe a little tear. Seriously. And what will band-aid that tear is cholesterol until the tear heals. If the tear doesn't heal, the cholesterol stays there, the calcium sort of lands on the cholesterol and solidifies it. That's what I think atherosclerosis is. So we have to look at vitamin C now.
I used to ascorbic acid, distinguishing between vitamin C and ascorbic acid, because they're not quite the same.
Right. And exactly where I was going.
Sorry.
I used to be a proponent of whole food vitamin C. It's like, oh, that's synthetic vitamin C, oh, we can't trust it and all the rest of it. But then during the crazy quarantine, I had a panel of about 6 vitamin C experts on my radio show. And I've read about, I mean, seriously, for 30 years, I've read about the benefits of ascorbic acid. But then every once in a while, you hear that, well, it's synthetic and all the rest of it. Humans don't make their own ascorbic acid. Supposedly, we had enough fruit in the Garden of Eden that we didn't need to make our own. Who knows what happened? We don't make our own ascorbic acid. Most animals make their own ascorbic acid. And people like Dr. Thomas Levy, who's a vitamin C expert, and he's also kind of a magnesium expert. He's written a book on it. I had him on that vitamin C panel. I said, so what's more important, Tom, vitamin C or magnesium? And he said, it's magnesium. It does much more. So that was interesting. So when you look at the benefits of ascorbic acid, and it can be made synthetically or it can be made from food products, sago palm, for example. So I say make it from food and make it the molecule that the body wants. When you look at the research, it's just phenomenal what intravenous ascorbic acid can do. You can't put intravenous food into your veins. It has to be the ascorbic acid. So I believe people require both, especially these days when we're over sugared and we need vitamin C, food-based, and ascorbic acid. The food-based is going to have tyrosine in it, which is very important. It's going to have all the bioflavonoids. I think it's going to promote collagen production more than just straight ascorbic acid. You need both. That's what I've come to.
It goes around and round in my head. I agree with you about the IV because it can make hydrogen peroxide. And again, that's really important for body's defenses because free radicals aren't all bad, and obviously for people who've got cancer. But then, like you said, I think especially with your magnesium, that people might just think, oh, I'll just get any vitamin C off the shelf in Walmart and I'll just grab some magnesium from Walmart and that's done. So I think it's like everything. When you get really into something, the devil's really in the tiny detail. And I think what you said right at the end about the animals can make vitamin C themselves, and there's a slight subtleness in the form. It depends how you take it. I think it's something that, again, it really interests me. When it comes to other minerals, obviously magnesium's your favorite. Have you got any more favorites, or do you want to go back to the vitamin C thing?
Let me just say, when I asked, Tom Levy said, when animals make vitamin C, it's the ascorbic acid form. And I thought that was very important. So there's that. Well, they're all important. Every time, I mean, I look at zinc, for example, it's producing products in 300 enzyme processes. It's necessary for 300. They say magnesium is necessary for 300. I think magnesium is necessary for up to 1,000. I've got references for 600 to 800. So the more studies they do, the more they'll find out about that. So what I said, okay, then I have to make a picometer zinc. So we don't need an ionophore. It's its own ionophore. But because I was using 20 milligrams in a dose, I said, okay, that's going to disrupt copper, because copper and zinc have an antagonism. For every 10 milligrams of zinc, you should have 1 milligram of copper. So I made a picometer copper. And that's what we call a bioavailable copper that easily goes into the cells and does a tremendous amount of important things in the body. I mean, I grew up in the days of Carl Pfeiffer, who said copper is toxic. It's horrible. And we still have that. I think Tom Levy thinks copper is totally toxic. So I think what we have to know is that all these minerals have a function in the body, but it's what type of mineral and what type of vitamin. Vitamins should be food-based. Minerals should be ionic. When you get a magnesium compound, you mentioned this earlier, Sara, all these compounds, what does it mean? Well, when you take 500 milligrams of a magnesium compound, like a magnesium citrate, only 50 to 75 milligrams are the elemental magnesium. The rest is citrate, or the rest is taurate or malate or threonate, and they're not magnesium. And if you have magnesium deficiency symptoms, you want magnesium. So you'll get this mislabeling as magnesium L-threonate is the worst. Their labels will say on the front 2,000 milligrams. They'll say magnesium L-threonate above it, and at the bottom 2,000 milligrams. You think, yay, I'm getting 2,000 milligrams of magnesium. You turn the label over. Well, you know, you have to take 3 capsules in order to get 144 milligrams. So each capsule is what? About 40 milligrams. Personally, I would have had to take, you know, if I was taking 12, I would have had to take 30 of those capsules in order to get my 1,200 milligrams. But I would have died in the bathroom because I would have had the laxative effect. So that, and magnesium L-threonate, did you know that it's magnesium L-threonate? I always thought it was threonine. Thought, well, the threonine part it helps with neurotransmitter function. It's good for the brain. Maybe that's what's working. But it's a threonate, which is a sort of a chemical byproduct of ascorbic acid. So it's not even a threonate. I mean, the marketing of it is just atrocious.
Oh, definitely. The thing you said about the magnesium, it's RTFL, read the effing label, which people can't seem to do. And I've tried to explain over and over to people about it's not this, it might say megadose 1,000 milligrams. It won't be. It'll be like 50, and they can't seem to get it, but it doesn't matter because sometimes you just have to explain nicely to people, okay, this is the situation, or just say this product's better because. So it's been really fun talking to you about magnesium, and I don't for 1 minute think it's like boring to talk about one mineral because it's so important, and still, you know, there's so much more we could have talked about.
And like you said, I have so many stories and they just pop into my brain. Or when people ask me questions, it's like, oh, you know, it opens up a whole bouquet of things. So, but I really appreciate your interest and your working with my minerals, and this book is just, it's available as a Kindle as well, Sara. So you can get a $5 Kindle and save your life. How's that?
I could do. The thing is, I've already read the PDF that I was sent by your team, but then it's one of those things I've got. I think there's not an audio book of the original one, but I've definitely got the original book as well. So yeah, you can have a Kindle, or you can have a hard copy, or you can have a signed copy. That would be even better, to have the signed copy. So I think it's if people want to find you or read more about your minerals and your chemist and all of the things that you make, what's the best way? Is it through your website, or how can people find you?
It's all online, which is such a blessing. So the store website is rnareset.com. I was on to RNA a long time ago. So it's rnareset.com, and my educational site with my radio show and my blog, webinars and everything is at drcarolyn.dean.com. And most of the site is freely available. We've had to go behind a bit of a wall because the FDA, as I said earlier, it won't let me talk about my formulas as if they're going to help people. A couple of years ago, they made me take down even testimonials from customers who said that this and that helped this and that disease. So they're very antagonistic to natural remedies. the FDA, it gets half its income from drug companies because it oversees the drug companies' testing of their drugs. And these are billion-dollar drug trials. So there's a lot of money involved. And the drug companies are making a lot of money. And they don't want to see vitamins take the place of any of their drugs.
Oh, absolutely. We could talk about all of this for hours about it's often the scientists who used to work for Pfizer who then go and work for the FDA. And it's like a revolving door of, a secret club of, but I think people understand you have to have education, you have to have things behind a wall, and it's not, being secretive or wanting people's money. It's just if you put stuff out on YouTube or for free, it gets taken down. And also you've got to protect your own medical license as well, because that's the other thing, because again, you're still an MD as well. So I think it's, I'll put the links to your website so people can reach out to you, because there's obviously like a whole world of stuff that they can learn from you. And I just really appreciate you coming on the podcast. And I really enjoyed it.
Oh, thank you. And thank you for what you do, because it's only through podcasts like yours that people can get the accurate information, and look into my eyes and see what I see. And that's what we're trying to do, is just pass on our information.
Oh, definitely.
Thank you very much for watching. I hope you found it useful. And Carolyn's actually into all sorts of other things to do with health and the body, so she's worth looking into. And I could have talked to her for hours, because she is also really great company and a very interesting and pleasant person. In the description, I've got lots of links to free information on quantum biology and other aspects of health, as well as courses and my Substack, so feel free to check that out.